Well, this is very much a pleasure. A friend and a longtime industry colleague, Dr. Grant Woods. Grant, thank you so much for joining us today.
Dan, thanks for having me.
Wow, I was looking, doing my due diligence this morning. Um, you started growing deer TV in 2009, and we started Deer Talk in 2011. And I know when we started it, I didn't want to do it. I had ink in my blood, and that's all I did. And
Sure.
that was one of the things that I looked to was like, well, Grant is doing this, and he's figuring it out. How did you tackle that digital world? I mean, that's quite a while back already.
Uh, have a really good friend, Bill Winky, and Bill and I have been friends for many decades. And Bill has started Midwest
Yep.
Whitetails and asked me to kind of just be the occasional biologist on there. And Bill's a great guy and a very skilled hunter. I'm more of a manager, biologist manager. And so anyway, we just decided maybe I should just do my own thing. And here we are. We've made a new show every week, 52 weeks out a year. Never missed a show, never had a repeat episode. So I'm silly. All you gotta do is say that guy's silly. He works too much.
That you are one of the hardest working people I've ever known. And that is amazing because when you mentioned Bill, I don't know if Bill remembers this, but this was right around the same time. We were in an airport, I think, coming back from one of the trade shows. And Bill he was having one of those days, and he said, dude, you just got to get out. Because that was back in remember the forums, internet
Oh yeah,
forums?
yeah,
He
yeah,
goes, you just got
yeah.
to get on those forums and talk to people. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I've got another job, but I'm glad I did because as you know how everything morphed, the industry for hunting, we went from print to digital to television, and here we are today. So we're doing it all. Now, if you don't know Grant, I'm just going to give you a very short bio. He was or is one of the founding biologists in the country as far as white-tailed deer study and how that relates to hunting and management. Grant, I don't know if you're going to have to correct me, but weren't you one of the original biologists that helped bring New Zealand brassicas to America?
I was real quick funny. I had my PhD brand new, which means you don't know anything at that time, and flew to New Zealand thinking I'm going to teach those guys about deer. And about 30 minutes off the plane, I knew to shut up, be quiet, because they knew way more and still do way more about deer forage than we do, because they do it as a business. These are captive deer. There are wild whitetails in New Zealand, brought from New Jersey in 1945. But anyway, but they study this. Their universities are about deer nutrition, where we're not at all. We might have a general nutrition, wildlife nutrition class. So yeah,
That is
and it's been fun to watch that change.
that is fascinating. Now we're going back over 30 years. That's red deer that they basically farm there, correct?
Primarily, they do some fallow and axis and a few whitetails. Whitetails, this is interesting. They never really domesticate that well. Red deer will get like cattle, not all the way. They domesticate much easier. If you think about it, they got big old muzzle or mouth. They're grass eaters. Whitetails got that little narrow long muzzle. They're very concentrate selectors, and part of that personality, they just don't domesticate well at all, even after a long time. And I know someone out there's got a pet deer. Tell you funny, years ago, about that time, I was working in New York on a private property and putting a trail camera up, which were rare back then. You kind of handled each one, carefully. And I just knew something was around me. I'm looking around, kind of a native grass area, don't see anything. Just had that feeling. And I've been back over to work on the trail camera, and bam, something just knocks me down from, hit me in the fanny. And it was a button buck that someone had raised and let loose. Fortunately, it wasn't a spike or it would have injured or killed me. And that thing just plowed into me. It was a rut, and that thing just plowed into me. So whitetails don't ever domesticate that well.
That is fascinating, and we've been we know the whitetail species. You're going to correct me if I'm wrong here. 19,000 years old. Not
All
positive.
that stuff's over my head. Yeah, a long time ago.
Long time
Long time
ago.
ago.
Okay, so Grant started, got your PhD from Clemson. I know that. You went to Georgia. A lot of great biologists from those southern schools have taught us so much over the years. But then over the years, you branched off. You started on your own, doing this. I think you call it the Proving Grounds in the Ozarks of Missouri. Take us through that, because I know you went and got, like, I don't know, it's like 2,000 acres or something like that, and you said, I'm going to take this old cattle ground and show people what you can do, not just planting food plots, but taking it from the holistic level of, this is habitat, and I'm going to turn it back into native habitat.
Yeah, so brief history there. I was finishing my PhD at Clemson. Dave Gwynn was my professor. Larry March and Carl Miller, all those guys were pounding on me, which was a blessing. Didn't seem too
That's
fun
an
at the time,
all-star studded crew, by the way.
they were pounding on me, and I just, to be honest, I'm that good kid. I didn't steal pencils, or back in the day you had to pay a nickel to make your copies, and I did all that. So secretaries liked me, and a call might come in from a small timber company or whatever to do a little work, because they were leasing land. If they can make their deer a little bit better, they can charge a little bit more per lease. And maybe the professors didn't want to touch it, so hey, Grant, you want to deal with this? And started doing a little work, and I said, man, this is so much funner than students, going out and walking land and figuring out how to make the deer herd a little bit better, whatever. So that's how I started consulting. And at the time, as far as I know, Dr. Harry Jackson, brilliant guy, and Dr. James Crow were doing some consulting, and I started doing some too. And I finished my PhD, and at that time I was making about as much money consulting as I would associate professor, and not dealing with a dean or whatever. So I said, I'm going to do this for years. I'll probably go back and teach someday. And just no brilliant plan on my part, just never did, and that kept going okay. And my wife, Tracy, and I wanted some land. We're both farm kids, raised on farms, and couldn't afford any land. And we found this old rocky, nasty place here by Branson, Missouri, that a gentleman had passed and left it to a hospital. And we were able to get a pretty good price on it. It was 1,500 acres. That sounds huge, but I mean, it's steep and rocky, 10 acres usable out, 1,500 acre type deal. And able to get that bought and put all our money in that. My family and I literally lived in a little barn before barn doors were popular back in the day, and raised our family there. I wouldn't change it for the world, just the best of times. Little 2-bedroom, nothing shack, and wouldn't change it for the world. And started doing stuff. This was just for family hunting, and realized, boy, some stuff we're learning that works here might help other people. And that's where growing deer came from. And if you look at a map, Dan, you know all this, but if you go from Maine all down to Smokies and swamps and whatnot, down to Florida and around East Texas and Arkansas, a lot of Tennessee, Kentucky, well, it's not Iowa, right? It's timberland and tough land. And that's where the bulk of the deer licenses are sold. Most of the shows, most of the publications, whatever, great big deer out of Iowa, whatever, Kansas, but that's not where most of us hunt. So we kind of found our niche working with those people that aren't hunting in a prairie state, an ag area. And that's just been fun for me to help people that have not premium deer hunting land, but to be able to fix it up and have really good hunting for them and their family, and produce some nice deer. We've produced some pretty nice deer here by standards. Some of our deer would be good if you killed them in Iowa. So it's fun for me to do that.
It's awesome, and it's inspirational, because it has shown you've shown me, but you've shown the country that you can take what is pretty marginal at best land, and that's some of the things I wanted to get into. I actually wrote down a few questions that
Sure.
some people had asked, but what is the number one problem? I know what you're going to say, but the number one problem, you buy a piece of ground, you get it at a good price, or you inherit it, or you're leasing it.
Yeah.
The number one problem right off the bat, if this has not been managed at all.
It's probably groceries, right? There's probably stuff growing that deer don't eat, be it trees, shrubs, whatever, that are capturing the sun's energy. And so there's not as much groceries. There's not as many groceries as there are deer. That's the number one thing we see. Even in South Texas, if you took out supplemental feeding, there was no mesquite there 150 years ago. All that brush wasn't there. That come up in the belly of a longhorn cow being driven on cattle drives from old Mexico up to Dodge City and places where there were train tracks. And as cattle would defecate out the pods they had consumed down in Mexico, that's how that brush got started in South Texas. Isn't that amazing? If you think about South Texas now, they used to be a big grasslands. And on ranches where and a lot of that brush is pretty decent food, but Arkansas, Missouri, wherever you got all these trees growing, or pine in the south, whatever, not a lot of groceries.
Same thing here, and that's kind of what I was getting at, was probably invasives over time.
Yes.
I think the best way somebody has described it to me over the years was up in our neck of the woods, upper Great Lakes. If you go in and clear cut a woods, you're probably going to get a brand new woods, and it
Yes.
might not be what you expect because of
Exactly.
years and years and years of overbrowse. All these invasives took place, and that's what you're dealing with. So for the average guy who's got a small property and he's dealing with that, what are some of the tactics that you would recommend that they look into? Not necessarily implement, but look into.
Yeah. A couple of things. You're exactly right, Dan. Invasives are a huge issue. Even on my place, we spend a lot of time out there with a squirt bottle or a hatchet or something, terminating invasives so better quality plants can fill that gap. There's not so much space out there. In your part of the world, buckthorn can be a big issue. We work up there. You're like, oh, you'd like to find the person that first brought buckthorn into America and spank them, right? Because that's such a weed right now. But controlling invasives and allowing more natural plants to inhabit that area and provide quality forage or cover for critters is a big thing. And it's relatively simple. I like simple stuff. I'm a simple guy. So again, with a hatchet or backpack spray or whatever, you can really make a difference on the property where you hunt by terminating invasives, hopefully being able to incorporate some prescribed fire, not always, but a lot of times, and stimulating that native seed bank to grow.
I know you've done a lot with both hack and squirt and fire. Is there the question on here are there native plants that you have used to restore fallow ground, or do you just let Mother Nature take its course?
I've tried planting some, and native plants, they're not genetically programmed like soybeans or corn or years been bred to grow in these conditions or whatever. And what I found, even at the worst of scenarios, if you can get a fire on there, or heaven forbid disc, or do some soil disturbance, you're going to get natives back. And I'd like to illustrate that. We used to manage a deer herd on Callaway Gardens, big golf thing west of Atlanta, very fancy place. And the deer were eating about $1 million of azaleas literally over
Wow.
these 4 giant golf courses. And they told us to harvest enough deer, get that down to $250,000. Absolutely true. I've shot deer every way you can on the golf course at night with some fancy toys out there. And one year they were going to redo a golf course, and contractor got help, whatever, said let it go. Now golf courses, if you don't know, they're sprayed, it seems like almost daily, with some kind of insecticide, fungicide, herbicide, whatever, keeping that grass looking just like that. And they let this golf course go. Within a few weeks, goldenrod and ragweed were coming up through the turf grass. That native seed bank that had been sprayed for decades at that particular golf course was still there. I was shocked. I thought, man, that land is sterile. Nothing's going to grow there. And by the end of the year, it was 5 foot tall. Looked like a prairie out there.
That's pretty awesome. Does spraying bother or concern you at all? Because everybody's doing it now. Does the fact that we're putting gly all over the place, does that have any repercussions in your mind?
Man, I don't like it. I don't think anyone gets up in the morning and goes, boy, I can't wait to get some of that gly washing off my four-wheeler across my face, or, see all that stuff on me. I don't think anyone likes that. But I look at it as it's just a tool. And in some cases, it's a necessary tool to restore native vegetation. I think way too much is used, or people use it kind of freely. But it's a tool like a root canal. You go to dentist and he says, well, if I don't fix this one, it's going to spread and rot out all the teeth. I sure like a good steak. I'm going to say, hey, dentist, take that tooth out or fix the root or whatever we got to do. So I look at it as a tool, and it's a tool like fire that needs to be used with knowledge and a prescription.
That's a great point. The other thing along those same lines as a tool, food plots, same thing. It's a tool. It's something that you can use to enhance your property. And I think you've always recommended, if you can do it, if you get your land to that, if you can get 25% of your property into supplemental food like food plots, is that approximately what you would recommend?
There's all these variables, what's growing on their neighbor's land, whatever. I have said that, you're right. I keep learning as I get a little older. So, if you're Mark Drury in South Iowa, you probably don't need 25% because your neighbors are feeding deer with soybeans. I'm choosing an example everyone knows. So, depends on where you are. But I tell people all the time, if you want Iowa type hunting or Kansas, pick an ag state, then the property needs to look like that. There's got to be a lot of sun hitting the ground. And I like to use Oklahoma because I think Oklahoma is a great sleeper state in America from the whitetail point of view. Western Oklahoma still is a lot of cattle pasture, a lot of prairie. It's too dry for a lot of row crop land. They grow some monster deer. And you're looking out there going, this is a cow pasture. There's cactuses out there. And then, old big giant steps out. If we get photosynthesis 0 to 3 feet and it's not full of invasive exotics that aren't palatable to deer, there's going to be big deer there if they live long enough to to get big. So getting sunlight to the ground, I wish I'd have learned that so much earlier in my career because that really helps me and a lot of other people.
What are some of the other things, Grant, that you have learned over, just say, the past 25, 30 years that might be contradictory to what you thought going into this project?
I think pines can be great habitat if you take them out of an industrial management type rotation and manage it more, again, like native habitat. I would tell you, and I had great mentors. I couldn't have had better mentors. But one thing that's really helped me in my journey is I like to read, and I love reading journals. And everyone thinks of Lewis and Clark automatically, and I say that. But there were trappers and explorers in my world here where I live in southern Missouri. There was a guy looking for lead. Lead mining was a big thing back in the day. And he kept a little journal like Lewis and Clark. Almost every morning he made a little entry. And a lot of people back then were pretty good botanists. So his observations let me know what my land should look like. And he talks about being able to ride through there on a horse and never knocking the hat off his head. Well, how many woodlots can we do that now? They're so thick from previous timber harvest or lack of fire, multitude of reasons. So opening up the canopy here, and I love burning, so doing a lot of fire has been a big asset. And please, this is not boasting at all. I'm not a great hunter, but I've killed 170 plus. Last year I killed a 163 with my bow. In the Ozarks in Missouri, counties were set up where, again, reading a lot, anyone in the county could get to the county seat, usually somewhere near the center, and a one-day horseback ride or 15 miles. That was considered a day horse. So counties are about 30 by 30, depending on rivers and stuff like that. So my property is split by county line. Right by county line. So 60 miles here. When I started doing stuff here, Dan, the record, not all deer recorded, but back in the day, you killed a pretty good deer, it was probably recorded, was a 131. We're killing, 160s, 170s. There's a massive difference there. No genetic change, just better habitat, better food, better deer management. And that can happen everywhere, folks. West Virginia, wherever you are, you can make a difference.
You can make a difference. And they have the videos to prove it on growingdeer.tv, Grant's website, and articles on hunting tactics and things like that. One thing you brought up, which I find fascinating, and I'm getting into it, in my many years of being on this earth, I finally got officially certified as a trapper here in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah.
And I've watched a lot of the stuff that you've done. How has trapping, I know it's an enjoyable activity and it's an important activity. How has that helped your wildlife management efforts?
Well, there's a lot of talk right now about declining turkey and quail populations, and no doubt habitat's a huge factor there. Huge factor. But also, when I'm 63, and when I was in high school, if you saw a pretty good sized coon, if you're on a date, you saw a pretty good sized coon on the highway that wasn't too smashed, you threw it in the trunk because that was $40 green on the carcass, literally. And that paid for a lot of dates, right? Or back in the day.
And if you're dating a gal that liked that, that was even better.
That was better, right? Yeah. So anyway, and by the way, there was no antibacterial soap back in the day. You just wiped your jeans and went on. In Missouri Department of Conservation, state I live in, we have a good Department of Conservation, and they have trapped fur sales each year. I'm sure it's not 100% accurate, but it's a great trend. And also they do a bow hunter survey every year. I've been drawn a few years, and you get a card and you fill out. I saw 2 bobcats, and everything, either from declining fur sales to increased observations. So the raccoon population here and possum and coyote and everything else is just like this. I mean, it's not like it's like this. And there's less land, right? There's more stuff marked parking lots, whatever. So we have more predators per acre. Now, that's not an official survey, but all the data points that way. I feel comfortable in saying that. So this year, I have 900 acres. I've sold off a little bit of land. I have 900 acres. We removed 131 coon and possum and skunk.
Wow.
That's a nest predator every 6.1 acres.
That's crazy.
How can they make it? And no one's trapping around me. So this year, actually, I got one of my neighbors, a guy that bought some land from us, and he removed 80 some odd. So we removed 200 plus raccoons in one little creek valley here. I got poults everywhere, buddy.
That's awesome.
I mean, I got, and we have good turkey hunting, but I'm already probably drooling right now, or 2 years from now, there's gonna be a bunch. It looks like right now anyway, bunch of 2-year-old toms running around. But last year, to make that story even deeper, I don't remember that number. We moved 101 or something. And year before that, didn't trap quite as much, used 80 some odd. And so deer are not territorial. Bucks are a little territorial about our receptive doe. Does are pretty territorial around their fawning site. We know this from GPS studies, right? But they're not, scrapes and rubs don't mark territories. This has been published in the 70s. But predators, raccoons, coyotes, are very territorial. That's oftentimes why you see a bunch of predator scat, coon scat on the road, because that's dividing one pack from another pack, literally. That's a border. They use something natural. Roads are great places to scent mark. So we remove, this data to me is fascinating, coons now for several years, and right now we're catching about 80% yearling males. We've reduced the female population on our property, but these yearling males are moving in every year. So I think some of the research done in the past in the turkey world, boy, we trap really hard, but it didn't make a difference 2 years from now or whatever. I'm just, don't call me up somebody and say, I'm just generalizing. It's a lot of work. I find it enjoyable. I had this super king size raccoon with coyote on the border blanket made for my wife one year for Christmas. Macho man in the cave. I caught these critters. I had people help me tan them. It's a beautiful blanket. If you like these things, it's gorgeous. And this is not crude. I'm very family oriented. So give it to Christmas. My daughter, that's great. Whipped that thing out on the bed the first night, thinking, big provider. I'll keep my family warm. My wife can get under in 3 minutes. We're kicking that thing off. You've got to be Nanook of the North to sleep under a. If you're in a normal house, you cannot sleep under for a blanket. It's too hot. So that's wall art now.
It's a wall art.
But there's a lot of uses. We make raccoon jerky. And Daniel, one of the guys that works for me, great guy, he made some raccoon jerky and deer jerky, and we put it in baggies, Daniel did, and gave it to, various friends of ours, cronies hanging around, shooting bows, whatever, Everyone picked the coon jerky or the deer.
Really?
Everyone. So a lot of uses for this renewable resource. And when you've got a predator that, we don't catch them all, folks. We still see them on our trail camera. So when you've got a predator every 6 acres, it's about, I would say, nigh on impossible for a turkey or a fawn. Big raccoon can eat a fawn, folks. You got a little 5-pound protein package sitting there. It's not running away. And a 20-pound coon comes up. They're not playing thumper, right? So, but turkeys, she's going to lay an egg about 10 days on average. So that's 10 days. And then she's going to incubate for 28 days. So now we're at 38 days. And then there are 14 days before they can fly and roost on a limb on average. That's 52 days on the ground. And you got a predator every 6 acres. And that's mammalian predators. That's not crows and hawks and black snakes and everything that likes a turkey sandwich. So I think predators are a huge issue.
Huge issue that you have to keep your foot on that gas pedal too.
So again, I know that, science is research, wildlife biology is a pretty small world. So I know personally all the big, turkey guys. And they may or may not like when I say these things, but we've been incorporated as consultants 34 years. We have a lot of great friends out there that we've helped on their property for a long time. And those that have improved the habitat and trap with some intentionality. You know, not just one trap by the chicken house. I mean, they got some traps out there. Have way better turkey and or quail populations than those that don't trap. In north to south, in many states. So I was just in Ontario a couple weeks ago. In the last 3 weeks, I've been from Maryland to Seattle to Georgia to Ontario. And we travel portions of 40 weeks out a year. I mean, we see a lot of property, wildlife properties. And those who trap seriously, make an effort, pretty concerted effort, tend to have more healthy bird populations. And one last thing, I'm on my pedestal right now, or ranting, but where I live, there are 27 species of songbirds and neotropical migrants. And we're all yelling at the South Americans for cutting rainforests, which is, I'm not promoting that at all, folks. Don't get this turned around. But they nest here. They make offspring here. And you got 27 little chirpy things, 0 to 5 feet off the ground in a nest. You don't think coons and snakes and crows are busting those nests up? We've gotten out of balance. And I'll go one last thing. I'm sorry, but if you read Daniel Boone, great journal. He's spelled like I do without a spell checker, but a great writer. Couple things. Or Lewis and Clark. Whoever you want to read. Daniel literally walked across Kentucky, never mentions tick. Lewis and Clark walked halfway across this continent, never mentioned tick. Where did fire go, folks? Ticks desiccate. So they dry. If they don't have moisture, they die. You put a fire across the ground, they desiccate real quick. The fire may not killing them because they sense it going to the ground, but when they come out and there's no moisture for 3 days, they're toast. Now what happened is we burned 10 acres and we probably took out a lot of ticks out of there. And then it greens up and it's the best food in the neighborhood. Well, the rabbits and squirrels and deer are back there eating, and ticks shed off those and repopulate. You got to burn bigger areas to burn frequently. And they also didn't mention many raccoons, because a savanna habitat, an open habitat, is not very favorable for raccoons. And they also mentioned turkeys by the thousands. Daniel Boone wrote here, the turkey gobble 365 days out a year.
Wow.
So we can do better. We know how to do better. And we still have to have production ag to feed us and stuff mart to buy, stuff out. We have that. But on our own properties, we can do better.
It's a great parallel between the fauna that you just talked about to the flora as far as what we're talking about invasive species. We've manipulated, this country to urbanized, and by that, all these small little properties. Well, you can't burn. I own 10 acres. I can't burn that because I'll burn down all the neighbors' houses, So that's what we get to.
Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Hoyt Archery and the all-new Alpha X30. Compact yet forgiving, it seamlessly blends into your hunting environment, whether you're nestled in your blind, perched in a tree stand, or venturing into the backcountry. The Alpha X30 allows you to make adjustments and tailor your performance like never before with the new HBX Exact Cam. For more information, visit Hoyt.com.
I want to, let me see what I got here. I want to switch gears with you, Grant. You were talking about, I think, a learning event when you were younger. Well, learning event, I don't know if you remember this, but it was when I first took over the reins of deer and deer hunting, which is 23 years ago. I had a cover, and I was going to put it up here for you, and I can't find it. When chronic wasting disease first came across the Mississippi on this side. And that, do you remember this?
I do.
I'm
a little embarrassed, but I remember.
Oh, no, I remember. It set you off, and you held me up as an example in front of the whole Southeast Deer Group meeting. But the cover blurb, Ian's going to find it. He's going to put it up on the video version for you guys who want to see this. It said, CWD, Apocalypse Now. And that was on the cover of DDH. It was one of my regretful moments to put a cover blurb. First of all, you do remember it.
I do.
And what was your reaction then?
You probably should tell that, but probably wasn't real favorable, that verbiage on the cover, because could scare people, right? And we didn't know enough about CWD at the time to make any kind of claim like that. I thought it was inappropriate journalism.
It
I'm being
was.
kind here.
It was, and I'm owning up to it right now, 23 years after the fact. But where are we sitting now in your mind as far as CWD in America, management, and the future? And that is a lot in one sentence.
That is a lot. CWD, it scares me and it brings out the best in all of us, or it has the potential to. So CWD is a 100% fatal disease. You hear all these things. And currently we're hearing a lot about, and I'm not being mean, but Dan knows I'm very candid, deer breeders, captive industry saying, well, if we do this gene or that gene, we're going to release these deer in Oklahoma and solve CWD. At the current state of science, those deer live about 2 years longer. They still get CWD, and they're spreading the prions, the causative agent, for 2 more years. So they're making more pollution or the ground more toxic for future deer herds. It's absolutely the wrong thing to do. I can get so much hate mail. It's okay because I love deer.
Bring it. Yeah, that's all right.
It's the wrong thing to do for those of us that love deer passionately. So CWD's 100% fatal. It is spreading. It spread a lot apparently in the back of a truck early on because there is no disease model that shows that disease spreading from where it is to Pennsylvania or Wisconsin that quickly and skipping ground in between. The only plausible model by disease epidemiologists, not wildlife biologists like me, is that was in the back of a truck. Could have been harvested game, maybe killed an elk in Colorado and took it to Pennsylvania, but probably it was a deer moving to a new deer facility. We don't know that. We can't go back in time and prove that, but that's what the really bright people believe happened. So we can't fix the past. What we can do in the future. And we know that moving deer or deer parts can spread this horrible disease that currently there is no cure for. It's 100% fatal. There are deer herds out west where it's been cooking longer that are getting low enough they may not be huntable populations pretty soon. You need to hear that, folks. There are deer herds, not computer models.
Where are some of these deer herds?
Wyoming, I think, would be the main place where the most research has been completed on this, documented, programs going on. And there's certainly states that are reducing amount of tags in areas due to CWD. And it's not spread to a human yet. Let's get that out of the way. There was some great research several years ago in northern Colorado where about 75% of the tags at that time were resident tags. So you got to think a lot of people there eating some mule deer, some elk, maybe a few whitetails, and had for decades. And they looked, and there was no higher frequency of neurological diseases there than the nation as a whole. Or in Wisconsin, I remember a famous study, a couple guys harvested some deer and had a church social, and later the results come back, and they were both, I think it was 2 doses, if I remember right, this years ago, and they were both positive, and CDC's been following those people for many years now, and none of them have shown any sign of getting, and they ate known CWD venison, positive venison. They've shown no signs. So CDC, Center for Disease Control, has done a lot on this because it's huge, folks. So right now, the best we can do is limit the spread. And there are 2 states that are a model, Illinois and Missouri. Illinois detected CWD about the same time Wisconsin did. And Wisconsin got some, in hindsight's perfect, I'm not saying at the time, but in hindsight, probably some bad advice. It did some stuff that wasn't too beneficial. And Illinois said, hey, we're going to take away feeding and baiting and minerals or whatever. We're just trying not to encourage deer to be nose-to-nose. Yes, they're still going to go to scrapes. Yes, they groom. But let's don't be additive. Let's not give them another reason to be nose-to-nose, okay, or licking the same piece of ground. And let's reduce deer herds a little bit so there's just even still less chances of being nose-to-nose. Now, if I said, Dan, man, that's a great time. We've been based on time. I got this landowner in Illinois in a big buck county. He gives me a couple tags every year. Why don't you go deer hunting? You're not going to say, no, Grant, I'm not going. No one says, I don't want to hunt Illinois. Or if they do, it's for some reason besides big bucks, right? There's plenty of deer in Illinois. Still a very popular hunting destination. And they had managed CWD very conservatively for over 2 decades now. And I think I got this right. I think the highest incident rates, of course, on one little small county, obviously epicenter CWD, that's 17%. There's a couple of places in Wisconsin, corners of counties, not whole counties, that are 60%. If you kill a buck, you got a 60% chance, or 6 out of 10 chance it has CWD. But statewide in Illinois, it's less than 3%. Statewide in Missouri, which has now had CWD known for about 14 years, 13 or 14 years, I don't remember exactly. Statewide, we're at 1% or less.
Why do you think Missouri and Illinois are that much lower?
Because they took those precautions. No baiting, no minimal. We're going to reduce the deer herd a little bit. They did what the science knows to do right now. All we can do is the best we know science is. There's all these arguments, and I'm not worried about arguing, but these are facts. They're indisputable facts. So when deer are nose to nose, we know that males get CWD at about twice the rate of females, because males go family group to family group to family group. Females tend to stay in their own family group. So this doe group over here is not with this doe group over here, except for button bucks dispersing. So there's a lot we know about CWD. There's some great work, but people don't want to hear it. And we know if we reduce the population, simple math, there's less odds of deer being nose to nose. We know that if you dip the soil up within a few feet, I don't remember the exact, it was in meters, scientific study, small area from a bait site or mineral site, the prion load is much higher than 50 feet away. Because all the deer are urinating, salivating, and defecating right there at the, the mineral site or the bait site. Or those silly tube feeders, right? They're all salivating right there in the tube. I like Dan likes me, but we're probably not sharing the spoon. Why do you want your deer, why would you ever encourage your deer? Take CWD out of picture. Lungworm, stomach worm, deer have gads of parasites, and we know if we take the parasites out of a deer, they have about 15% bigger antlers. That's one reason captive deer look so big, man. Those things are fed all kind of dewormers and stuff like that. They're not like that deer on your back 40 that's guts full of stomach worms.
What about your view on bans on deer urine?
Deer urine's different. It's not as big a carrier of the disease as like saliva or other parts. So I could go either way. I guess I look at it like this, okay? If there's a nuclear bomb and I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not touching it.
I'm not trying to bait you into this, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. So because I've used a similar remark, and I don't know if you know where I stand on this, but I always said if the Sistine Chapel is on fire, where are the fire trucks? And when I say that, and I know some people are not going to like me saying this, but I've said it before, if the Sistine Chapel's on fire, which is our deer resource, why are we planting 1/10 acre brassica plots or turnip plots where deer's picking up a turnip? And you know as well as I do, if you got a turnip as big as a softball, there's more than one deer eating that turnip. And if saliva is a bigger vector than urine, which we know, I mean, the study out there is it takes 33,000 gallons of infected urine to infect 1 gram of brain protein. Why are we like walking out there planting turnips? I personally think it's way overkill as far as banning urines, which we know is not a high vector, and then on the other side of our mouth, we're saying, I bet it's fine, you can plant turnips.
Planting turnips, not planting turnips. Urine, I've never been on the urine bandwagon. I think, for me, I would only use the synthetics in here because I've worked with deer herds that have been decimated by CWD. I'll give you an example, and I'm not going to be real specific because I know these people, but there's a 30,000 acre ranch in very northwestern Kansas. That's as specific as I'll be. Years ago, they hired me to assist them, and they were killing a bunch of 200-inch, 5, 6, 7-year-old bucks. They were making really good money. They were selling hunts. I could never afford to hunt there. This wild free ranging herd. And it's 30,000 acres, mostly contiguous corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. and wild pastures. I couldn't have drawn out much of a better deer plan, right? And they hired me because the amount of big deer they were seeing or harvesting or selling hunts for had declined precipitously. They hired me, and I go out there, and I 2 hours in the pickup looking around. God, this is not a habitat thing. You got alfalfa in the bottom, corn and beans on the flat tops, brushy pastures in between. It doesn't get a lot better. Known production, long history of producing giant deer, muleys and whitetails. Have you thought about CWD? And they're a family, CWD is a government hoax. Well, it ended up being CWD, and I personally know several people that had land in western Kansas. I used to love to hunt western Kansas. If I turn my computer around, I can show you some big bucks right here from western Kansas. I wouldn't hunt western Kansas now. CWD is strong enough. The chances you see in a 7-year-old buck are slim. They don't live that long.
Why do you think it has not affected Texas? With all the baiting and feeding and high fences? And
it does affect Texas. Unequivocally, those tests are clear, but Texas has lower hunting pressure per acre than a lot of places. There are many big ranches that will kill 200-inch deer from now on, but there's 7 people hunting, 10,000 acres or whatever it is. That's the magic to Texas. I was part of this research. Carl Miller, Dr. Carl Miller, Dr. Larry Marchson, Micah Goldstein was a graduate student, and his project was Dooley County. You remember Dooley County, most of our listeners won't. That was the first quality deer management county in America. And I think the rule was, this is decades ago, had to be 15 inches wide or wider or was an illegal buck. And Micah went to all the check stations and deer coolers and everything, and all this data to show that one way of showing quality deer management, passing up bucks, letting them get older, would get bigger. And what Micah found during that study was, Dr. Miller and Dr. Marston, was that the average 1, 2, and 3 and 4-year-old buck in Dooley County, Georgia, are way bigger than the average 1, 2, 3, 4 buck in the Golden Triangle in Texas, the biggest county in Texas, because it's got a lot better groceries. The only reason they don't have more big deer is they don't live that old. There's a much, much higher hunting pressure in Georgia than there is in that, big ranch area of Texas. So if 30% of the, I'm just throwing a number out, this is not facts. If 30% of the bucks are dying of CWD in South Texas, no one would know it. They're still killing deer. It's exactly like the turkey numbers now. The big stud turkey biologists, which do great, I don't mean that facetiously, I should say brilliant turkey biologists are saying, we've been over harvesting turkeys for decades, but because the turkey population was so big, it could handle it and no one knew it. They're still filling tags. But now the population's getting low enough, people are going, well, I don't hear many gobblers anymore. So if you've got facetious numbers, folks, for illustration, 100 big bucks on this ranch, and you're killing 10 a year, or you have 70 big bucks on the ranch, a 30% decline, and you kill 10 a year, no one knows any difference. So it's very unfair, unscientific to say it's not impacting Texas.
Okay, that's a fair point. If it is, I know we're going to be short on time here, but I could talk to you all day on this. If back to my point, if the Sistine Chapel's on fire, why isn't there a bigger push then to in areas that have there are areas with mandated antler point restrictions? Why would we even think of doing that if bucks are for the most part the ones more responsible for spreading this disease?
Well, let's take Missouri, for example, and I don't work for the state, and I have my disagreements with them too, but I must say they're a really good state agency. There are a lot of good state agencies out there. And state agencies have politics and pressure not to do what's biologically right, and so do hunters. And so in Missouri, we have areas where we still have point restrictions because they've never had a CWD positive in that county. Once we get a CWD positive in that county, point restrictions go away. And some area around there. It's not just, I'm using county simply, but there's a measurement distance. So I think there are some good examples. I think there are, and states doing the right thing. And there's some states doing the way bad thing. Wisconsin did some silly stuff early on, and media and people out there in Tyvek suits, like the Martians had landed, and TV cameras rolling and all this stuff, and silliness. And And on the other side of the coin, Oklahoma thinking they're going to release some deer from paying some deer breeder a whole bunch of money is going to solve the thing statewide. We know this has been well known. You release a deer that's been bottle fed and lived on welfare its whole life, never worried about a coyote, never worried about a hunter, out in the backcountry of Oklahoma. How long do you think that deer's going to live out
Not
there?
for very long.
Not very long at all. At all. That's silliness. So I just ask people, we don't know all the answers. I'm not a disease guy at all. I'm regurgitating. I go to meetings and try to learn. Let's use the state of science that we know it now. Let's get some funding for CWD research, not just monitoring. We've been monitoring. It's in this county, it's in this county, it's in this county. And the deer breeders have done a great job of doing some work, kind of towards their objective, not overall. Hunters need to step up to the plate too. We need to be donating, we need to be earmarking money for CWD because it's the biggest crisis we face, more than anti-hunting or anything else like that. It's the biggest crisis we face, period.
Is that crisis just for the... what is your concern? I mean, I'm not going to give you my opinion yet. What is your concern? Is the crisis just for the state of the whitetail itself, as opposed to the so-called potential human health problem?
So far, it's never been shown to go to human health. There was a study way back when, you know about it, the guy superfed some macaque monkeys, and they showed it, and they're kind of a substitute for humans. I don't consider myself a monkey. Maybe some of y'all do. We can think, and we have pretty advanced tools, not a stick. So I think there's a pretty big difference.
It's a species, different species too, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. I go back for one reason, many years ago, there was a governor of Colorado that really was an anti-hunter. I'm not going to mention names or time frames. And finally, one of his guys put in the room and said, "Governor, we don't have elk hunting tomorrow like we have it today. We don't have public school tomorrow like we have it today because it's that big of impact on our tax base." And he went promptly elk hunting in front of camera that next year. Because money drives the boat, folks, unfortunately. I wish we all just did what was right every day. With white-tailed deer, not only do, I can't remember the study, but something like more fifth graders recognize the white-tailed deer as our national animal than the bald eagle, which is sad of our educational system. Whitetails are a mainstay of America any way you slice it, period. And who doesn't enjoy seeing them? My wife would tell you I can't only drive straight when I see a deer after all these years going down the road. So there's a lot of reasons to protect whitetails, but economics is one of them. Hunting still makes twice the money as the NFL. And that can't be. The Packer Stadium, you're up there. Packer Stadium's full every weekend. Well, how many more hundreds of thousand hunters are in the timber all camouflaged up, not wanting to be seen? Or, you can buy, a Packers jersey at the stadium, a few local stores, and on whatever advertises on the NFL show. But there are 200 Cabela's and Bass Pros, not counting Academy, Shields, whatever. It's not even comparable. Gets more media, and media drives the bus, but not even comparable. So there's a lot of reasons. And then let's think about this. Whitetails interact with other species and other plant communities. If they were gone today, that'd be a massive keystone species out of our ecosystem. And many things would go awry. Aldo Leopold wrote many years ago, "We don't know all the parts, so we shouldn't be tinkering." So we want whitetails here. We have a disease that's 100% fatal. Some of my colleagues argue, well, if it got really bad, you'd probably live at least old enough to reproduce once and sustain a deer herd. That's true right now. I agree. I can't imagine we just barely sustain whitetails. They're on the endangered and threatened list. I can't imagine that. Moose, elk, moose will be gone. Moose will not survive it like whitetails will. Moose will be gone. They have to be a little older. They don't reproduce near as fast. Moose can not survive.
And their reproductivity rate is not even close to a whitetail.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, they can't. They don't have the ability to recover.
Well, Grant, thank you so much. I wish we could talk for another 3 hours on this because this stuff is just fascinates me. And the other thing, I want to just a nice shout out. as a fellow brother in Christ, that is another thing that I've always appreciated about you, is you have never shied away from praising the Lord.
Thank you so much for saying those encouraging words, and you also, and thank you for your decades of good work. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. He is Dr. Grant Woods. His website is growingdeer.tv. You're going to find it all everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I think you guys even have TikTok and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dan.
All right. For Dr. Grant Woods, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us for Deer Talk Now. Every Thursday, we drop a new episode. Well, Spotify, Ian, right? Any place you can find the podcast, and also the video versions on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and everywhere else. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next week for another episode of Deer Talk Now.